Welcome to Herbally Yours, an adventure into the world of natural medicine. Here is your host, Dr. Ellen Kamai, the natural nurse who will help you take the leap to ultimate wellness.
Greetings, and thank you for joining me, Ellen Kamai, the natural nurse, for another edition of Herbally Yours, right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. You can listen live on air or online at iHeartRadio, Odyssey, TuneIn app, smart speakers, nccradio.org, or download our own award-winning WHPC app to hear all of the shows here on WHPC. Herbally Yours brings you the latest information in the many facets of the world of natural living. Today, it is our pleasure to bring on board as our guest Mr. Rob Verkerk. He's a PhD and the head of Alliance for Natural Health. I want you to write that word down, Alliance for Natural Health. I have been part of their information since their inception many years ago, and it is really your best source for information about natural health, and I know all our listeners are interested in that. Dr. Verkerk is an internationally acclaimed expert in health, agriculture, and environmental sustainability, with nearly 40 years of experience in the nonprofit sector, academia, and acts as a consultant. His extensive background in ecology and sustainable agriculture include a Master in Science and a PhD and a postdoctoral fellowship at Imperial College in London. And since recently, actually, he has took the helm as executive and scientific director of the Alliance for Natural Health after serving on the organization's board as scientific director for almost 2 decades. So thank you so much for all your work for the Alliance for Natural Health and for being our guest today, Dr. Rob.
Thank you so much indeed, Ellen. It's an absolute treat to be on your show today.
Let's go back in time and tell me what brought you to have an interest in natural health.
Ellen, it may be not that dissimilar from you. Look, I've had a fascination with nature since I was a little kid. I was, born in Kenya. I grew up with a lot of nature all around me. I was always interested in this dichotomy between people who thought that real solutions always laid with technology, and those of us who believe that our ultimate teacher is nature. I was in that latter camp. Nature for me is this incredible thing. Still, I mean, I was amazed quite recently with 150 doctors and practitioners in front of me. I asked the question, what is life? And I was amazed. Everyone was scratching their heads. We don't readily come to a view because of our educational system about what this thing called life is, and yet we're meant to be able to heal it and treat it. And so passion for nature, and essentially I was also very interested in politics and to see how the system has gradually been sort of either making it more difficult for us to use nature and also trying to condemn and downplay the value of using nature as a primary healing strategy. So put those two things together. I was deep into my academic career. I was in my 7th year of postdoctoral research at Imperial College, and my desire to do something to protect natural health at that stage when it was being attacked, not only in the US, but also in Europe, led to me setting up Alliance for Natural Health. And of course, we then merged with what was the American Preventative Medical Association, became the American Association for Health Freedom, and then became ANH USA. So yes, it is part of my life mission to protect and promote natural health as the primary approach for managing health, and to ensure that each and every one of us has sovereignty and doesn't hand everything away to the system, the corporatocracy, this globalized agenda that is now taking control of people's health.
Yes, and it's issue after issue for all the years that you've been involved on the sidelines and have now become the director of the Alliance for Natural Health. I've always found of all the organizations, and of course I'm involved in many of them in the natural health space, your organization has always been the best at bringing information specifically about access to natural health. And you make it really easy for people to just click on letters to their senators and things like that. So they don't just have to think about, boy, I'd like to take action. You make it super easy to take action.
It is the grassroots that really have kept natural health accessible all this time. It's a thing that we know works over and over again. It's one of the reasons we have action alerts on our website that do make it easy. A lot of people are being asked to click links on particular petitions. What we still have, some faith in is that the democratic system and some of the fundamentals of the US Constitution hold true. And that's what we use to really bring the voice of the grassroots to Congress, as well as educating people. If we have to educate people, and we work as a true alliance. So we also network with a very wide range of different organizations and clinical groups and practitioners to really bring the voice of natural health to Congress to make positive change that really is about making a difference, not only for this generation, but also for future generations.
Well, there are so many individual issues, but I do want to delve deeply into one that is really very close to my heart because I use it both in my practice to recommend to individuals and even in my family. My son's going to be 48 years old this week, and long before he was born, I was using homeopathy. And homeopathy is now really being attacked. I imagine you know that both Walmart and Amazon got letters from the FDA for allowing the sale of some homeopathics on their site.
Yeah, as of last year, the FDA has determined that homeopathic products are illegal, and they're saying, well, they've always been illegal. And of course, Ellen, you will know that this has been part of a very, very long struggle. Like all these struggles, they go in cycles, and you can go all the way back to 1910 and the Flexner Report to see what happened back then, when Carnegie and co. essentially destroyed as much as they could of alternative medicine, of which homeopathy was a very significant part. And they are now having another go at it. And essentially, we have one of these situations of a lack of understanding amongst the regulators, a lack of recognition really of the mechanisms for how it works. So we have this idea where a lot of sway can be put behind an attack on homeopathy because they'll just turn around and say, how come these sugar pills work? Or there's not even, a microgram or a nanogram of active ingredient. How can it work?
Well, that's true. So
that you have to go to a completely different branch of science to look at energy medicine and to look at quantum physics to see there are explanations, but they're outside this standard pharmacological paradigm.
But really, homeopathy, I think, should be a home remedy, especially in the lower doses, that everyone should have at their disposal at all times. It's so inexpensive, so effective, with such a low incident of adverse effects that it's a mindless task for the government to try to make it illegal for people to access this wonderful technology.
But what's fascinating is during COVID, homeopathy was actually one of the things. If you look at the case reports, Ellen, you'll be very familiar with this. It did incredibly well, not just in America, not just in Europe, but in many other parts of the world. And it was that recognition, again, that gives the regulators another reason to go after it. Because for everyone who's using homeopathy as a home remedy, that's one person less that's taking pharmacological drugs?
Oh, ta-da! I think you got to the actual root of the problem, Dr. Rob Verkerk, is that who is against this really is the pharmaceutical industry. Because here's something that helps people and is very low cost and doesn't line their pockets and forces less people to take prescription pharmaceutical drugs. That is the only threat, not to individuals using it.
And the fascinating thing is that if you look at the evidence base, as you will know, if you look at the meta-analyses and systematic reviews, actually, the balance of evidence, if we're to use that approach, which we're being asked to use for pharmaceuticals, shows actually an effect that goes way beyond placebo. And I find it very interesting. You can see the kind of programming that is done of society if you want to check AI. So if you go onto ChatGPT and you ask, for example, what is the evidence for homeopathy? It comes up saying the whole thing is a sham, that there's no evidence for it, completely denying the fact that actually the balance of evidence in systematic reviews and meta-analyses, which is the evidence standard that we're meant to be using for pharmaceuticals, shows it to be working. The problem that they've got is that they cannot understand how it works. And because they can't understand how it works, they recognize that's a good enough reason to try and shoot it down, because it is heavy competition for pharmaceutical drugs. But yes, I did find it interesting. One of the other terms I recently put into ChatGPT was, tell us about the problem of vaccine hesitancy. And of course, then it tells us that is a very well established science that is incredibly important, because a lot of people are being harmed because they are refusing vaccination. So, yeah, there's a lot of programming out there in society. And one of the things that we're passionate about is to make sure that choice is available. We're not necessarily pro or anti any one modality, except for when governments and corporations try and stop people from accessing it. And of course, now we've got this really joined up system with the media that is deciding what is appropriate information and what will be determined to be misinformation, malinformation, or disinformation. And it turns out anything that doesn't fit with the view that comes out of the NIH or the FDA is deemed misinformation, disinformation, or malinformation. And that's a problem. And of course, it's the grassroots that can rectify that. And of course, there is a whole alt media system developing, and that communication, regardless of what they do, is not going to be stopped.
Well, let's hope not. And I want to remind our listeners that you are listening to Herbally Yours on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Listen live, online at nccradio.org or any podcast venue of your choice. And for more information on today's guest or topic, you can send us an email at whpc@ncc.edu or directly to me at naturalnurse.com. You do want to check into ANH, and you can even just, Google the name of the organization as well. Just go Alliance for Natural Health, and then you can get their free newsletter. In addition, there's lots of other great information there, like different trainings people could get if they want to be a holistic health provider. Lots of wonderful information is there. And our topic for today is so important with our guests. This is protecting America's access to natural health, both the remedies and even the information, which, as you said, is being, very interfered with at this time. To me, that's scary.
Absolutely. The information control, we just had it in May. The Nobel Prize Committee got together, had a summit to look at how they're going to be dealing with this, what they consider to be a rising tide of misinformation. And they used two subject areas to give examples to this. And one was COVID and another one was climate change. And again, what's fascinating about these areas is that they're trying to determine what we can or can't speak about And of course, in particular around COVID, they don't want people to hear about alternative treatments. But what's common across both these areas is a huge amount of uncertainty, because they're very, very complex systems, and we still have a lot of information gaps in both these areas. And one of the things we have to become is more tolerant of this uncertainty. And because there is uncertainty, we also need people to be able to make, particularly when it comes to making a choice about a health treatment, we need to really allow people to make different kinds of choices, including making selections about early treatments or natural treatments. And of course, it's particularly concerning now because the whole thing is beginning to ramp up. We don't have the same degree of antigen testing going on that we had in 2020. But of course, it is ramping up. And it is just a matter of time before people are really being told, mask up, lock yourself down, and receive the treatments that we want you to have. And remember, those natural treatments, none of them work. But you only have to look at the data to see that actually it was the natural treatments. It was having sufficient circulating vitamin D in your system that you did pretty well on, making sure that your levels of zinc were up, taking bioflavonoids like quercetin. All the people who made those choices ended up doing pretty well.
And it's so easy.
Homeopathy was so important too.
Absolutely, all of those things, like oxalicoxinum, for example. But right on your website, I really think people should sign up, AHN-USA. ANH, right? And also, we will have a live link at the bottom of your bio to make it easy for our listeners. But you were talking, Doctor, about something called quercetin. So easy to just go to PubMed. They have not taken the studies off PubMed, by the way. They're there. You could just put in quercetin or vitamin D and COVID, and you will see this massive amounts of studies showing the evidence. Now, it's interesting because I'm a Florida resident. And in Florida, I'm also a nurse, a PhD RN. I get emails from the Department of Health, Florida Department of Health, this is interesting, saying, do not give anyone a COVID booster without reviewing the possible very intense side effects to getting the COVID booster. And it's the opposite in New York. They give it to everybody, and if you don't want it, you can't do this and you can't do that. Although they've dropped a lot of those requirements, even for nurses working in hospitals, that people lost their jobs over that here last year. So isn't it interesting that the state of Florida is actually requiring health workers to provide information about the possible negative side effects before giving a COVID booster?
Well, look, indeed, and the other thing is, what it shows is this incredible difference in interpretation of data. One of these studies that I think is useful for people to visit is c19early.org, because what they've been doing is basically pulling all of the available studies together, putting them into a forest plot so you can see what the net effect is in terms of pooled effects are, being either lower risk or increased risk. And you'll see many of the natural compounds are doing remarkably well. And some of the drugs even, it's one of the reasons that we really do support an integrative approach. You'll see that colchicine, which is, again, natural, but anti-androgen drugs, because men often with high androgen did suffer more significant symptoms, have done remarkably well. But you've got things like melatonin and gelasativa that are also done remarkably well compared with some of the drugs that they were pushing, such as molnupiravir, for example, or fluvoxamine. So really important to learn from history, to be able to point people to resources that allow people to make more informed choices, because actually from that ethics perspective of autonomy, one of the fundamental principles of medical ethics, we don't believe that people were given really the properly informed right of choice when it came to, taking treatments for protecting, either preventing or treating COVID-19 disease.
What was the name of what you just said? C19 early?
C19early.org.
Okay, I never heard of that one.
And you'll see that they also run a cost per life saved listing there to show that melatonin $8 per life, vitamin D $10, vitamin C 14, zinc 16. So you'll see that in terms of the cost of the treatment per life saved, natural remedies are easily the most cost-effective treatments.
And have less side effects. I wonder if they discuss the newer antivirals, which are becoming the treatment of choice here in the U.S.
Well, you've got Paxlovid in there. Do you want to compare that? Vitamin C, I said, was $14. Vitamin D, $10. Paxlovid, $46,111.
Oh my God! But
life saved.
But the person doesn't have to pay that. But you're saying, of course, that with the cost of the drug.
That's the cost to society. Molnupiravir is $137,653 per life saved.
Wow!
Compared with a tenner for vitamin D, 14 for vitamin C. So this is one of the problems. The sheer cost effectiveness of natural remedies, the fact that they are unpatented, means they're going to be continuously under attack. And this isn't just something that's happening in the US with the FDA. This is now very much part of a globalized, international agenda. And it's one of the reasons that we're bringing together the work of A&H International that I set up back in 2002 with what we're doing in the US. It's why I'm heading up both organizations now, because the problem is so joined up, but so is the solution. And the solution is about making sure we can really maximize choice for individuals so that they can make informed choices and go natural should they want to.
That's so fantastic. And that's the Alliance for Natural Health. Just Google that or go to anh.usa.org. You can sign up. They send out great newsletters all the time. Did I say it right?
It's anh-usa.org.
Okay,
but you'll find it. Just put in Alliance for Natural Health into Google and you'll find us.
Yeah, that's the easiest way. And we've been, like you said, it's gone through various name changes, but the same real message in all the years that I have been getting those newsletters and sharing it with my mailing list and individuals I work with, because really your point is you're not saying only use natural things. You're saying allow us to have choice, and that is being threatened.
Correct. And, there are so many different organizations. In October, we will be in your neck of the wood, we'll be in Florida with the Beljanski Foundation. And the Beljanski Foundation is doing some remarkable energy on herbal products that have remarkable cancer protective effects. And of course, if you look back at how the Beljanski Foundation came into being, it was the result of the work of the remarkable scientist who worked with the Pasteur Institute in France, Mirko Beljanski, who was actually responsible for finding particular botanicals that were used even for the treatment of François Mitterrand, the past president of France. And he was basically given a death sentence with cancer stage 4. He was given these treatments and he recovered. And of course, much of the French nation, when this got out to the media, said, what on earth were these products? And they turned out to be natural. The result was that his research labs got completely raided and destroyed by the French government. And, in the end, he basically died before his daughter, who now runs the Beljanski Foundation out of Florida, came into being. Now, that kind of story of horrendous response from authorities to alternatives has been repeated in the United States as well. And in fact, the organization that gave birth to what we are now as A&H USA was the American Preventative Medical Association. And, that came into being when clinics of people like Dr. Jonathan Wright were raided by the FDA for similar reasons. So there's a pretty dark history in terms of how authorities around the world react. The only thing that has allowed access to continue is the grassroots coming, out there, raising the paving stones and saying, look, enough is enough. And you need to pull back and reduce this overreach and allow choice, because ultimately it is in the public interest, not just in the interest of a few companies that are making billions out of selling pharmaceutical drugs.
Right. Some of which work, some of them that have horrendous side effects, and should, also be allowed to exist. But not only that, with you not having choice. That's the point of your organization.
Correct.
So thank you so much for all that work that you are doing. I'm hoping that people join in. There's so many other topics to talk about, such as something people have heard about, I'm sure, such as the PFAS, which really are invading molecules throughout the environment, and, governments are not regulating those. So there's so many, many issues.
Is when you combine poor diets, poor lifestyles with globalized food supply together with the environmental chemical burden and the new to nature EMF burden that we're in the last 3 years in particular, we've seen this massive exodus of satellites being sent into space as the world prepares for the Internet of Things, beaming down these digital waves on us that are interfering not just with human beings, but many other life forms, including, insects and birds that rely on magnetic fields for orientation. You've got to look at the whole system, and those are the kind of areas that we're looking at. Anything that interacts with natural health, so that we can understand it better and make sure that a regulatory system exists that is fair and proportionate and doesn't sort of regulate natural therapies out of existence.
So true. So thank you so much, Dr. Robert Verkerk, and for all your work with anh-usa.org. Or, like I said, just visit our show. We will have a live link for that. And thank you for being our guest today.
Ellen, thank you so much for having me.
And thank you, listeners, for tuning into Herbally Yours, produced in the studios of 90.3 WHPC, Nassau Community College, Garden City, New York. For further information, email us at whpc@ncc.edu. This is your host, Ellen Kamai, at naturalnurse.com, inviting you to join us again next week for another edition of Herbally Yours. Until then, stay healthy.